In metaphysics, we know the power of our thoughts. We know the power of consciousness, that thought is formative, and that we can change our thinking. We can choose to think deliberately. It really begins with paying attention to the thoughts that we hold. And if we find that we are holding thoughts that are limiting or holding us back, or critical or negative or self-defeating, that we don't punish ourselves for noticing that we're having those thoughts. We acknowledge that we have noticed that, but we remind ourselves that we can choose again and that we can, in fact, change the way we are thinking. And that when we do, our life does begin to change. And when we challenge ourselves to think in a big way, bigger than we have before, that practice, that energy helps to open a path before us. And so when I talk this morning about the idea of thinking big, and I share some examples with you, and I share some practices with you, one of the things that I think is really important is that we look at it in terms of where we are as individuals today. We are all at different places in our lives, different stages and phases and ages in our lives. We come with different experiences and skills. We come with different strengths. We also probably come with some different baggage. Would you not agree that we've got stuff that we're kind of working with or working through and working beyond? And so when we hear messages about this idea of changing our thinking, when we hear messages that invite us to think bigger, and we are reminded of examples of big thinking in our world, we want to make sure that we don't put it out there so far that we think it's not reachable for us, that it doesn't apply to us, because it does. You might be hearing this lesson through the lens of a situation in your family where thinking differently and bringing bigger thinking, more creative and bolder thinking into that arena is the place that you'll be working and thinking about this. Or it might be related to your career, what it is that you are doing for your livelihood or what you want to be doing for your livelihood. How do you hear these ideas in that arena, in that field, to think more broadly, to think bigger? Some of what I'm sharing with you in this series comes from a book that I found a couple of months ago, written by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And as I said last week, you may like him, you may not like him, you may think of him only politically, or you may think of him in terms of his movies or his accent or his bodybuilding and all of that. But regardless of how you think about him, the ideas that he presents, the very broad ideas that he presents in his book, the title of the book is Be Useful. I happen to like a title like that. Very simple, very practical. Be useful. And he divides it into 7 tools. And he starts with the tool of vision. We talk so much about vision in metaphysics, don't we? That you have to have a picture in your mind of what you want. The other tools that he writes about that we're going to be looking at, the one today, is big thinking. But he also talks about hard work. He talks about communication, direct, clear communication, resilient problem solving, open-minded curiosity, and a commitment to giving back. All of these really are ideas of perennial wisdom, and certainly we can find evidence of all of them in our basic New Thought metaphysical teachings. So big thinking. I believe that we're living for all of the challenges that we might be aware of in our world today, locally, nationally, globally. We're also living in incredible times, times of great creativity, times of great innovation, times of, I think, really big thinking that is transforming what it means to be a human being, how we connect, what we do, how we live. I think of just changes that we have seen in recent years and changes we're hearing about now. I mean, every one of us in this room, remember that the only way that you would get treatment from a doctor was what? You went into a doctor's office, right? And now, how common is telemedicine, right? Right at the end of our fingertips, so we can just sit there and look at our doctor and have an appointment that way. We're hearing about space exploration, right? We're hearing about companies like SpaceX taking people, out into the galaxy and beyond. We're hearing about things like CRISPR, genetic gene editing, which can be both exciting and a little bit frightening, right? Depending upon how it is used and the ethics brought into it. Maybe you're aware that we're hearing about smart cities. We've got smart devices in our homes, right? Right? Smart cities, what does that mean? And urban planning that can be much more gentle on the planet and much more resourceful and resilient. Would you not say that these are some big ideas? I think they're incredibly, incredibly big ideas. One of the things that is always important to me, especially with the kinds of big thinking ideas that are prevalent in our world today, is I pray and I hope and I try to work on myself to make sure that my consciousness, that my sense of ethics and values and right use of these things is uppermost in our mind. I'm reminded, and I know I'm going to misquote the words directly, but I'll get the essence of Martin Luther King Jr. talking about the idea that we have guided missiles but misguided men and women. Meaning that, when he was speaking in that context, we have so much weaponry that we're using, but we have not raised the consciousness, the guidedness, the conscience of enough of us to use what we have for good, for good. Michelangelo said, as I quoted earlier, the greater danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving our mark. Setting our aim too low and achieving our mark. He's saying, set your aim high, right? I remember a cute little story I heard, a ministerial illustration, bless you. I heard of a little boy who is fishing in his swimming pool. Fishing in his swimming pool. An adult notices it and says, what in the world are you doing? He says, I'm fishing for sharks. And the very wise, mature adult said, there are no sharks in that pool. The little boy said, I know that. But there are no fish in there either. I might as well fish for what I want. Right? I might as well fish for what I want. Was he doing what Michelangelo talked about, right? He was setting his aim high. He was setting his aim high. When we're imagining change in our lives, whether it is in our family dynamics or how we spend our time or where we spend our time or the work that we do at the beginning of our careers or the work that we want to step into when we retire, we want to think creatively. We want to be like that little boy. I'm going to fish for sharks. I'm going to go for what I want. I'm going to go for what I want. Does it mean I'll absolutely get it? No. But you certainly won't if you don't try. You certainly won't if you keep yourself from thinking a bigger thought for your own life. To do that, we have to kind of ignore the adults or the people or the naysayers that say, there are no sharks in there, right? We have to ignore the naysayers. We shouldn't doubt our dreams. Better to doubt your doubts. Don't doubt your dreams. I kind of think that there's something very spiritual about the dreams that live in us. I have this theory, this belief that the dreams that really live in a person are divinely placed there. That whether you call it God or I don't care what you call it, that those dreams, those ideas of what's possible for you, for your life, for the people that you love, for the world you want to live in, that those dreams are not yours alone, that they're the divine or God in a way, saying, in order to make this a happier world, to make communities happier, to make families happier, I need you to follow your dream. I need you to do whatever that thing is. I encourage you to think bigger, more creatively. I encourage you to throw your fishing rod in the swimming pool and fish for what it is that you want and hold that vision and stop giving so much attention to the naysayers, the ones who say that you can't do it. A lot of times, those are the ones who've never really tried very much of anything at all in their life anyway. Have you not found that to be true? I've certainly found that to be true. That the naysayers in my life, when I really look at, well, where have they stepped out boldly? What have they really accomplished? What have they really done? I think, well, it doesn't seem particularly big or bold or creative or new or innovative, so why would I give that naysayer comment so much space in my mind instead of giving the space in my mind to what is possible and doing everything that I can to live in that bigger thought. The author of Lord of the Rings was rejected by publishers 21 times. My kids have read every one of those books. J.K. Rowling's original Harry Potter was rejected 12 times. I like this one. Andy Warhol gave the Museum of Modern Art one of his drawings for free. They gave it back to him. They gave it back to him. Madonna was rejected by numerous record labels before she got her deal. Same is true in the business world. How many of you have ever used or stayed in an Airbnb? Lovely way to travel. The founders of Airbnb were rejected by all 7 investors they initially pitched their ideas to. Now, if you were to go to Unity Village, some of the buildings there that have been totally transformed and are beautiful, some of the original buildings and homes that were occupied by our founders are now like 5-star, first-class Airbnbs. But it's an idea that those business people had, those creators had, and there were a heck of a lot of naysayers that said it'll never fly, it'll never work. It's been very successful. Steve Jobs, how many of you have an Apple device? Vast majority of us. Got fired from his own company at one point in his career. That one just blows me away. That one blows me away. Walt Disney, how many of you have ever seen a Walt Disney movie or have grandkids that have all the Walt Disney paraphernalia? His first animation company, you probably know, went bankrupt. Just one more. Netflix tried to sell to Blockbuster. Remember Blockbuster? For $50 million, and Blockbuster laughed at them. There's a lot of this naysaying energy, right? Right? I don't know how that plays out in your life, but I do know the importance of not giving it so much credence. We had naysayers tell us that we would never raise the money that we needed to move out of renting an office space in Mission Valley to eventually buying this building and then actually paying for it completely over time. They told us, the experts, there's no way you will raise the money that you need to raise. Tell a dreamer, tell a group of conscious metaphysicians there's no way they can do something, and what are they going to put all their energy into doing? Doing it, trying to prove the naysayer wrong. Schwarzenegger writes in the book, fulfilling a dream gives you the power to see further and deeper, further out into the world toward what is possible and deeper into yourself to what you're capable of. You know, when we set a goal for ourselves, when we have a dream, and it doesn't have to be as big as somebody else's dream, but when the dream is ours and it is a bigger thought than we have thought before, and we work toward it and we achieve it, how does that feel inside? It feels good, right? It feels good. And do we then just kind of say, oh, well, I'm done now? Not usually, not usually. Usually it lives inside of us with a greater degree of motivation of, oh, wow, I actually was able to do that. I'm going to try the next thing, whatever that thing is. And not from a place of dissatisfaction, but from a place of motivation, from a place of inspiration, from a place of creativity. This world would function so much better, I think, if we were each playing to our own strengths and our own God-given talents and abilities and really exercising that. Mine are not the same as yours. Yours are not the same as mine, and that's a good thing. It may make working together sometimes a little more challenging because we have different approaches and different ways of doing things and thinking about things and accomplishing things. But if we can remember that we each have an important part to play, and all we are expected to do, and when I use the word expected, I mean like from the divine energy, all we're expected to do is to do ours the best that we can, the best that we can. And then leave the other details to spirit, to the universe itself. So some suggestions for how to challenge yourself, and I've already kind of alluded to it throughout the talk already, is the idea of setting a big goal for yourself, setting something that requires you to think bigger. So pick an area of your life right now. Maybe you have as you've been listening. Maybe it has to do with your business. Maybe it has to do with going off to college. Maybe it has to do with something you want different in the way that you live your life. What would be a bigger thought that you could hold for yourself about that? I think it was Karen Drucker who wrote a song whose emphasis is, what would you do if you could not fail? What would you think? What would you go for if you knew you couldn't fail? So what would be that bigger thought at work or at home or at school? The second piece of that, I think, and these are not necessarily chronological, I think they're things that we kind of work on simultaneously once we have that bigger thought, is to continually be about seeking opportunities to expand your knowledge base. It's so easy to do that right now. It's so easy to do that right now. I was at my hairdresser that I've been going to for like 25 years now, I think. And Stephen was telling me about a challenge he was having with the lights in his bedroom. And that he checked the circuit breakers, he checked everything and couldn't figure out what was wrong with his lights, called his electrician couldn't come out because his electrician was on vacation, but gave him the name of somebody else, called somebody else, that somebody else couldn't come out. And he said, you know what, Wendy, I went on to YouTube University. And he called it that. And he said, and I learned what to check for, and found that there was a faulty wire or ground in one of the plugs, and it had a step-by-step tutorial, and this is not, and Stephen, I love you, this is not a man that you would find is really comfortable in Home Depot. But he watched this YouTube University video, learned what he needed to learn, and he said, it was a bigger thought for him, really. He said, I felt so proud of myself after that. I fixed it. I bought the stuff. I fixed it, right? So continually seek out those opportunities with your bigger thought. Well, who else maybe has a positive idea about it or a piece of the knowledge that you don't have about it? Check it out. And it's so much easier now, right, than it ever was in generations before us. Here's a no-brainer to me. Surround yourself with inspiring people. And especially if you either live alone or if you live with a naysayer. You can love a naysayer. You may be married to a naysayer. That's all right. You want to make sure, though, that when you're holding that bigger thought for your life, for your family, for your job, for your career, that you've got at least a couple of inspiring people that you can kind of turn to and seek encouragement from them and know that they've done some amazing things in their life, so you can do some as well. It's not going to be the same amazing things. It's going to be your own amazing things. Another piece, I think, is dare to tell. Dare to tell. Dare to tell someone what you're drinking. Dare to tell someone you are fishing for sharks. Dare to tell someone you're fishing for sharks. Be willing to get out of your comfort zone and take some risks, right? It's when we're trying something new, chances are really good there's going to be some discomfort. It's going to feel. Have you ever done something new and it felt kind of like you had your shoes on the wrong feet? You know that feeling, right? Like you can still get your feet in there and you probably can walk, but it's not very comfortable. It just doesn't feel what? Normal. It doesn't feel natural. That's been my experience anytime I've tried something different. Anytime I've challenged myself to think a bigger thought. It has not felt comfortable at the get-go. But you know what? We begin to stretch into it. We begin to grow into it. And we all know that it's not enough just to be thinking about it. It's not even enough just to put it on a vision board. It's not even enough just to share it with our prayer partner or our spouse or to tell another person. What is it that we also have to do? Yeah, we've got to do something. Whatever the next right thing is that's right before us. And it may not be a great, big, huge thing. And that's often why we don't do anything. Because it seems like, well, that's such a tiny step. Does it really matter? The answer is yes, it really does matter. It really does matter. It matters because it gives us the motivation then to take another step. It matters because it builds some confidence and trust in ourselves that we are not just thinking it, we are also acting upon it. And I've said this so many times over the years, that when we start to create some momentum, when we start to take some steps forward, then more steps start to open up before us. We start to see a little bit more of the path before us. One of the most debilitating things we can do to ourselves, I think, is to expect to have it all figured out at the beginning. We can't have it all figured out at the beginning. We're not supposed to have it all figured out at the beginning. What was that Bronson quote? Let me go back and see if I can find it. Well, where did we put it? Oh, it's on my note sheet over there. The one, if people aren't calling you crazy, that's okay, Natalie. If people aren't calling you crazy, you aren't what? You're not thinking big enough. You're not thinking big enough. So, to challenge yourself to think bigger, it doesn't matter where you are chronologically. Some of you may be listening online, and this is time of year that seniors are getting ready for their graduations from high school. They maybe have already graduated. They know if they're going off to college. It's such an exciting time for them to be thinking about their careers, what they're going to do at that age and period of life. Thinking big, I think, is really natural. And if you are fortunate enough to have a young person at that point in their life, in your life, do everything you can to help keep alive in them that all things are possible. But it doesn't matter where we are in our life. It doesn't matter where we are chronologically. We can all be invited to be thinking bigger, and we can all be challenged to know that there's more for us to be, more for us to do. I love cooking. Some of you know that. I'm inspired by all kinds of chefs, particularly inspired by Julia Child. You know, she did not start pursuing her culinary career until her late 30s. That's right now to me that seems really young. But that was kind of late to start something, right? Vera Wang, the fashion designer, didn't enter the fashion industry until she was in her 40s. Took her a little while to figure out what it was she wanted to do. How many of you remember the Little House on the Prairie series? I still am a sucker for that series. I absolutely adore that. We have all the books. We have all of the, videos when they came out in video, all of the DVDs and so forth. Laura Ingalls Wilder. Do you know that she published her first book of that whole series at the age of 65? At the age of 65. Do you know why her writing career began? and it eventually became, the TV show and all of that. It began because it was a way for her to preserve her family's pioneer experiences. At 65, you may be sitting here thinking, wow, I've got I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about you. You might be sitting here thinking, you've got quite a story to share, that your family, future generations might go, wow, I didn't know that about Uncle Joe or Aunt Mary or whatever. Thinking bigger, it doesn't matter what phase of life we're in. And the last one, Grandma Moses. Grandma Moses began her painting career in her, do you know? Late 70s. And she took up painting, folk painting, became very prolific, very accomplished at it. Do you know why she took it up? The arthritis in her hands kept her from doing her love of embroidery. She thought a different thought, a bigger thought. I would imagine, would have loved to have interviewed her, would imagine that at 70 she might have thought she was crazy, perhaps, to think she was going to start a completely different kind of career or hobby. So the point being, you and I live in a teaching that is built on these ideas, is built on the power of vision, is built on the recognition that thought is formative. We have to follow it with feeling, we have to follow it with action, and do so with consistency, but there's nothing but ourselves that will keep us from thinking a bigger thought. And so my challenge to you today is to do that very thing, to challenge yourself to think a bigger thought, whether it's about your family, your work, your lifestyle, your relationships. What's the bigger thought you could be thinking? Can you fish for sharks? Namaste.